My name is Kira Collins. In the eyes of my arrogant stepfather and my submissive mother, I am just a failure of a daughter. A 38-year-old spinster still glued to her computer screen in her childhood bedroom. But what they don't know is that the computer isn't for games. That device holds the backup nuclear launch codes. And the moment my stepfather, Rick, snatched my secure red smartphone out of my hand to teach me a lesson about respect, he made the single stupidest mistake in history. I still vividly remember the moment the smug satisfaction on his face, flushed red with cheap liquor, vanished instantly, replaced by a color as gray as fireplace ash. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hands trembled uncontrollably as he realized the voice on the other end of the line wasn't my imaginary boyfriend. It was the icy, steel-hard voice of the President of the United States. "This is the Commander-in-Chief. You have just severed a connection with a high-ranking military commander. Federal agents will be at your front door in 30 seconds. He thought he was the king of this tiny suburban kitchen. But he was about to discover that the stepdaughter he constantly humiliated was the only person in the room who could order a ceasefire for an entire naval fleet. If you believe that you should never underestimate someone's silence because you don't know what kind of powerful beast is sleeping inside them, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button." The air in the dining room was so thick with tension and the smell of overcooked poultry that I could barely breathe. It was a typical Thanksgiving in Virginia, or at least typical for this house. The Dallas Cowboys were playing on the massive flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. A TV Rick had bought with money he claimed was from investments, but was actually from the mortgage payments I secretly sent my mother. The volume was cranked up so high that the floorboards vibrated every time the defensive line made a tackle. "Touchdown! That's what I'm talking about!" Rick bellowed, slamming his fist onto the table. The gravy boat rattled dangerously. He was a large man, his face perpetually flushed, wearing a polo shirt that was 2 sizes too tight around his midsection. He pointed his fork at my grandfather, Arthur, who was sitting quietly in his wheelchair. "You see that play, Artie? That's real power. Not like the soft stuff they teach in the Corps these days." Grandpa Arthur didn't respond. He just stared at his empty plate, his hands shaking slightly from Parkinson's. I cleared my throat, a small, involuntary cough caused by the dry, dusty air of the house. Rick's head snapped toward me instantly. "Quiet down, Kira. Can't you see we're watching the game? Some of us appreciate greatness." I looked down at my plate, cutting a piece of dry turkey. "Sorry, Rick." "Sorry doesn't fix an interrupted play," he grumbled, reaching for his third can of Miller Lite. He stood up, grabbing the electric carving knife. The buzzing sound, "Vrrrst, vrrrst," filled the room, sounding more like a chainsaw than a kitchen utensil. He wielded it like a weapon, pointing the vibrating blade around the table to emphasize his authority. "All right, new rule," Rick announced, his voice booming over the sportscasters. He picked up a wicker basket from the counter and slammed it onto the center of the table. "This is a digital detox zone. I'm sick of seeing everyone's face buried in screens, phones, in the basket. Now." My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just about checking Facebook. My phone, a heavy reinforced device that looked like a regular smartphone in a bulky case, was a secure line linked directly to the Pentagon. As a lieutenant general and the designated survivor for the holiday rotation, I was required by federal law to have it within arm's reach at all times. "Rick, I really need to keep mine," I said, my voice steady but quiet. "I'm expecting a work call." Rick laughed, a harsh barking sound. He leaned over the table, the electric knife still buzzing in his other hand. "Work call? From who? Your supervisor at the data entry plant? Or are you selling Tupperware now? Is that what you're doing in your room all day? Multi-level marketing?" The guests, my aunt and a few neighbors, chuckled nervously. "It's important," I insisted, sliding the phone off the table and onto my lap, covering it with my napkin. I could feel the weight of it on my thighs, a heavy reminder of the nuclear triad I commanded. "Look at her," Rick sneered, addressing the table while pointing the knife at me. 38 years old, no husband, no kids, no real career, still living like a teenager. "You know, Kira, in my day, Women your age who weren't married were called spinsters. Now you're just, what do they call it? A drain on society. I gripped the linen napkin so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to tell him that while he was flipping burgers in a mess hall in the 90s, I was graduating top of my class at West Point. I wanted to tell him that the data entry I did involved encrypting coordinates for ballistic missile submarines. But I couldn't. The classification of my job was top secret. To them, I had to remain invisible. I looked across the table at my mother, Carol. She was picking at her mashed potatoes, her eyes darting between Rick and me. Surely, she would say something. She knew I paid the bills. She knew I wasn't useless. "Mom," I whispered. Carol forced a tight, apologetic smile. She reached out and placed a prime slice of white meat onto Rick's plate, soothing him like one would a rabid dog. "Oh, honey, leave her alone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You know Kira is a little slow to launch. We can't all be winners like you. Don't let her ruin your appetite." The air left my lungs. It wasn't Rick's insults that drew blood. I was used to those. It was her, slow to launch. My own mother, the woman whose house I had saved from foreclosure 3 times, was apologizing for my existence to keep a bully happy. Rick smirked, chewing loudly with his mouth open. "Damn right. At least someone in this house respects the man who puts food on the table." Under the table, the secure phone vibrated against my leg. A specific pattern. Long, short, long. Priority 1, alert. I looked at my mother one last time. She avoided my gaze, focusing intently on pouring gravy over Rick's stuffing, terrified that if she looked at me, the fragile piece of her delusion would shatter. That look of pathetic submission was the same one she had given me 22 years ago, the day Rick moved in. And just like that, the dining room faded. The noise of the football game became distant white noise, and I was pulled back into the memory of the first scar she ever gave me. That look in my mother's eyes, that pathetic, pleading glaze, was a time machine. It dragged me right out of the suffocating dining room and dropped me cold onto the parade deck of Michie Stadium in West Point, New York, 16 years ago. It was one of the most significant days of my life. I was 22, graduating in the top 5% of my class from the United States Military Academy. The air was crisp, filled with the thunderous applause of 20,000 proud parents, siblings, and spouses. To my left and right, my fellow cadets were beaming, scanning the bleachers to find their families holding up homemade signs and waving American flags. I was the only one staring at 2 empty metal folding chairs. I had sent them the tickets months in advance. I had even offered to pay for the plane tickets from Virginia to New York. But 2 days before the ceremony, my mother had called. Her voice was small, breathless, the voice of a woman who was permanently walking on eggshells. "I'm so sorry, Kira," she had whispered. "It's Rick. His sciatica is acting up again. He can barely get off the couch. He says the drive is too long, and he doesn't want to fly." "You can come alone, Mom," I had pleaded, gripping the receiver so hard the plastic creaked. "It's my graduation. I'm becoming an officer." "Oh, honey, you know I can't leave him when he's in pain. Who would make his meals? Who would help him with his ice packs? We're so proud of you in spirit, though." In spirit. Rick didn't have sciatica. Rick had a bruised ego and a laziness that ran bone deep. He couldn't stand the idea of a day that wasn't about him, so he anchored my mother to that couch in Virginia, and she let him. Standing there in my dress gray uniform, tossing my white cap into the air amidst a sea of cheering families, I had never felt more singular, more isolated. I learned then that to my mother, keeping the peace with Rick was more important than celebrating her daughter's triumphs. The sound of silverware clinking against china snapped me back to the present. I looked around the table. The investment Rick bragged about to the neighbors, the money that bought this spread, the oversized TV, and the new siding on the house was a lie. 5 years ago, Rick had gambled away their savings on sure thing penny stocks. The foreclosure notice had been taped to the front door. Mom had called me, hysterical, begging for help, but terrified Rick would find out she asked. So, I stepped in. I set up a direct deposit. For the last 5 years, a significant chunk of my military salary went directly into keeping a roof over their heads. And how did Rick repay that? The problem with the neighbors, Rick was saying, spraying bits of stuffing onto the tablecloth as he talked, is that they don't have the financial acumen I do. I told Bob next door, you gotta know when to buy and when to hold. That's how we afford the good life, right, Carol? He winked at my mother. My mother, the woman whose home I was paying for, looked down at her plate and nodded. That's right, Rick. You've always had a head for numbers. I felt bile rise in my throat. She was rewriting reality to soothe his fragility. She was erasing my sacrifice to build his pedestal. I wasn't just invisible, I was the fuel they burned to keep their delusional life warm, and they didn't even have the decency to acknowledge the heat. Speaking of the good life, Rick continued, pivoting to his favorite topic, his glorious military service. He took a swig of his beer and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I was telling the guys at the bar, the military these days? It's a joke. It's a daycare center. He looked directly at me, his eyes gleaming with malice. Back when I was serving, Rick declared, puffing out his chest, we were tough. We didn't have these timeouts and stress cards. We got the job done. Now? It's all woke politics and sensitivity training. I bet you spend half your day in diversity seminars, don't you, Kira? The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. Rick had served 2 years in the late 80s as a mess hall cook before getting a general discharge for insubordination. He had peeled potatoes and scrubbed grease traps. Meanwhile, I was currently managing the logistics for a Trident submarine deployment in the Pacific. I dealt with nuclear deterrence, geopolitical chess matches with superpowers, and the lives of thousands of sailors. It's a different world now, Rick, I said evenly, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. The threats are more complex. Cyber warfare, satellite defense. Excuses! Rick slammed his hand on the table again. See, that's the problem. Too much thinking, not enough action. You need killers, not computer nerds. If I was in charge, I'd straighten out the Pentagon in a week. I'd show them what real leadership looks like. I'm sure you would, I murmured, stabbing a piece of dry turkey. My mother chimed in, eager to please him. Rick always says the country is going to the dogs. He knows so much about history, Kira. You should listen to him. You might learn something to help you with your job. I froze. My own mother was suggesting I take military advice from a man whose tactical experience ended at deciding how much salt to put in the mashed potatoes. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a profound, hollow exhaustion. I realized then that I wasn't sitting at a family dinner. I was sitting in a theater production where everyone had a script except me. Rick was the hero, Mom was the adoring fan, and I was the prop, the silent, disappointing daughter they could project their insecurities onto. I looked at my hands resting in my lap. Under the napkin, my fingers brushed the cold, rubberized case of the secure phone. I was commanding 50,000 troops. I had the trust of the president. I had the power to level cities. But I couldn't command my mother to stand up. I couldn't order her to love me enough to defend me. That was the one war I had lost, over and over again, for 38 years. If you are rooting for Kira to finally stand up for herself and wipe that smug look off Rick's face, hit that like button right now. And please comment "I see you" below if you believe that true family is about who shows up for you, not just who shares your blood. Let's show Kira she isn't alone at this table. As the comments section in my mind filled with the support I never got from the woman sitting across from me, a sudden sensation pulled me back from the edge of despair. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration. Against my thigh, the red phone buzzed. Not a text message, not a spam call. It was a rhythmic, insistent pulsing that sent a jolt of adrenaline straight into my bloodstream. Buzz, 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 buzz. The DEFCON 3 alert pattern. My heart stopped beating for a second. The world outside this dining room, the real world, the dangerous world, was knocking. While Rick was complaining about the texture of the cranberry sauce, something catastrophic was happening on the other side of the globe. I gripped the phone under the napkin, my knuckles turning white. The contrast was dizzying. Above the table, I was a disappointment. Below the table, I was the only thing standing between peace and nuclear winter. What's wrong with you? Rick barked, noticing my sudden rigidity. You look like you swallowed a bug. Stop twitching. It's distracting. The vibration against my thigh wasn't just a notification, it was a scream in Morse code. Dot, dot, dot. Dash, dash, dash. Dot, dot, dot. SOS. In the civilian world, that signal means, save our souls. In my world, the world of the National Military Command Center, it means a strategic asset has been compromised. My heart didn't flutter, it slammed into a rhythmic, combat-ready cadence. My sympathetic nervous system flooded my body with cortisol, sharpening my vision and dulling the ambient noise of the room. But I couldn't run to a situation room. I was trapped in a suburban dining chair, flanked by a mother who was afraid of her own shadow and a stepfather who was currently dissecting the viscosity of the turkey gravy. Carol, I gotta be honest with you, Rick said, his voice wet with chewing. He held up a spoonful of the brown liquid, letting it drip back onto his plate with a pathetic splash. This gravy, it's water. It's got no body. Did you even use the drippings, or did you just mix that powder packet with tap water? My mother flinched as if he'd thrown the spoon at her. I used the drippings, Rick. Maybe I didn't let the roux thicken enough. I'm sorry. I can heat up a jar of the store-bought kind. No, forget it, Rick grunted, wiping a smear of grease from his chin with the back of his hand. I'll just suffer through it, like I suffer through everything else in this house. While he played the martyr over condiments, I carefully, slowly, peeled back the edge of the linen napkin on my lap. The screen of the heavy, rubber-encased smartphone glowed with a dull, red light. A specific wavelength designed not to ruin night vision, or in this case, not to draw attention in a dimly lit dining room. The message on the secure app was short, terrifying, and scrolling rapidly. Alert! Alaskan Defense Sector. Unidentified submersible detected. Acoustic signature. Match. Severodvinsk class. 12 miles off Aleutian coast. My blood ran cold. A Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine was skimming the edge of U.S. territorial waters. This wasn't a drill. This was a provocation. And another thing, Rick continued, pointing his fork at the TV, where the Dallas Cowboys were lining up for a third down conversion. Look at that quarterback. Overpaid prima donna. He doesn't know the meaning of sacrifice. I tuned him out. My thumb flew across the biometric scanner on the bottom of the phone. Access. Granted. I needed to act. I was the senior watch officer for this shift. The Pentagon was waiting for my authorization to escalate. If that submarine breached the 12-mile limit, they could launch a cruise missile that would impact Seattle in less than 15 minutes. I typed in the authorization code for a flash override command. Alpha Zulu Niner 2. Pass the cranberry sauce, Rick demanded. Not the homemade stuff with the chunks. The can. I like the jelly kind. My aunt passed him the cylinder of dark red jelly, shaking her head sympathetically at my mother. Under the table, my fingers were fighting a war. I accessed the deployment grid for Elmendorf Air Force Base. I highlighted the squadron of P-8 Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft sitting on the tarmac. These weren't just planes. They were submarine hunters, equipped with torpedoes, depth charges, and advanced sonar buoys. Deploy assets. Intercept vector. Rules of engagement, shadow and Dieter. I hit execute. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple, stinging my skin. It wasn't the heat of the kitchen. It was the crushing weight of the chain of command. I had just scrambled $500 million worth of military hardware while eating dry turkey. If I was wrong, if that was just a whale or a glitch in the hydrophone array, my career was over. If I was right and I did nothing, millions could die. Kira! Rick's voice cracked like a whip, shattering my focus. I jumped, my knee knocking against the underside of the table. The water glasses rattled. I quickly slid the phone deeper between my thighs, covering it completely with the napkin. I'm sorry. What? I stammered, looking up. My pulse was thumping in my ears, loud as a drum. Rick was staring at me, his eyes narrowed into slits of suspicion. He had stopped chewing. A piece of turkey skin hung from the corner of his lip. I asked you if you wanted a roll, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. But you wouldn't know that, would you? Because you're too busy playing pocket pool under the table. The table went silent. My mother gasped softly. Grandpa Arthur stopped his tremors for a brief second, his eyes locking onto mine. "I'm not playing games, Rick," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I told you, it's work." "Work?" Rick scoffed, leaning back in his chair. The wood creaked under his weight. "You're 38 years old, Kira. You don't have a work that requires you to text under the dinner table on Thanksgiving. You know what I think? I think you're texting some guy." He laughed, looking around the table for validation. "That's it, isn't it? Some loser you met online. Probably some guy who lives in his mom's basement, just like you live in mine." "It's not a guy, Rick," I said through gritted teeth. The status bar on my hidden phone turned green. Assets airborne. ETA to target, 12 minutes. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The P-8s were in the air. The Alaskan coast was secure. I had done my job. I just needed to survive dessert. "Don't lie to me," Rick spat. The jovial bully was gone, replaced by the angry drunk. He pointed his knife at me again. "I have a rule in my house, no secrets. And definitely no disrespect. You think you're better than us? You think you're too good to engage in conversation with your family because you're swiping right on Tinder?" "Rick, please," my mother whispered. "Let her be." "No, Carol, you coddle her." Rick slammed his hand down again, harder this time. "She sits there, eating my food, drinking my beer, using my electricity, and she can't even look me in the eye. She's hiding something." He stood up. The chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. He loomed over the end of the table, a towering mass of insecurity and cheap cologne. "Show me the phone," he demanded. I froze. "No." "Excuse me?" Rick's face turned a shade of purple that matched the cranberry sauce. "I said no," I repeated, my hand clamping down on the device under the napkin. "It's private, and it's none of your business." "My house, my business," Rick growled. He started walking around the table toward me. Heavy footsteps. Thud, thud, thud. "You're living under my roof. You follow my rules. Now give me the damn phone, Kira. I want to see who's so important that you have to ignore your own mother on Thanksgiving." I calculated the distance. He was 6 feet away, closing in. On the screen beneath my hand, a new notification popped up. Confirmation. Requested. DEFCON status elevation. I couldn't hand him the phone. If he saw the screen, if he saw the classified marking, if he saw the nuclear launch protocols, that was a felony. A federal crime. But more than that, if he took it, if he disconnected the secure link, the Pentagon would lose contact with their senior watch officer during an active intercept. "Rick, stop," I warned, my voice dropping an octave, slipping unconsciously into my command voice. "Do not come any closer." He paused, surprised by the tone. Then he smirked. "Or what? You gonna cry? You gonna run to your room?" He lunged. The sound of shattering glass sliced through the tension like a guillotine blade. Rick's hand, inches from grabbing my wrist, jerked back as a spray of ice water exploded across the table. "Son of a bitch!" Rick yelled, jumping up from his chair. He swiped frantically at his chinos, where a dark, wet spot was spreading rapidly near his groin. "That was freezing! Are you kidding me?" All eyes turned to the end of the table. My grandfather, Arthur, sat frozen in his wheelchair. His right hand, the hand that had once held an M1 Garand rifle in the Pacific Theater, was trembling violently. A heavy crystal tumbler lay on its side in a pool of water and half-melted ice cubes, the contents dripping steadily onto the carpet. I, Grandpa Arthur stammered. His lower lip quivered, not from fear, but from the humiliation of a body that no longer obeyed his commands. "I tried to." The condensation. "Oh, for God's sake," Rick roared, grabbing a fistful of paper napkins and scrubbing aggressively at his pants. "Look at this. Look at the mess. This is why I said he needed the sippy cup, Carol. But no, you said it was undignified. You know what's undignified? Pissing ice water all over the host's floor." "Rick, please, it was an accident," my mother pleaded, rushing to blot the tablecloth, her face flushed with second-hand shame. "An accident? It happens every time." Rick threw the wet napkins onto Arthur's plate, right on top of his uneaten stuffing. He's a liability, Carol. A drooling, shaking liability. The VA home is too good for this. He belongs in a nursery. The rage that had been simmering in my gut turned cold and hard. I didn't look at Rick. I didn't acknowledge his tantrum. In one fluid motion, I slid the secure smartphone from my lap into the deep pocket of my oversized cardigan, ensuring it was tight against my body. Then, I stood up. I walked past Rick, ignoring his muttering about dry cleaning bills, and knelt beside my grandfather's wheelchair. "It's okay, Grandpa," I said softly. My voice wasn't the high-pitched baby talk people often use with the elderly. It was low, steady, and commanded calm. I picked up the fallen glass and set it aside. I took a linen napkin, one of the fancy ones Rick had insisted we use to impress the neighbors, and began to dry Arthur's hand. His skin was paper-thin, mottled with age spots and blue veins, shaking with the rhythmic tremor of advanced Parkinson's. Most people pull away from that shaking. It makes them uncomfortable. It reminds them of mortality. But I held his hand firmly, matching his tremor with my own stability, grounding him. I dried his fingers with the same precision I used to inspect a weapon or calibrate a targeting system. Efficient, respectful. "I'm sorry, Kira," Arthur whispered, his watery blue eyes looking at me with a clarity that belied his physical frailty. "I just wanted a sip." "I know," I replied, folding the napkin neatly. "Accidents happen in the field. We clean up, and we move on." Rick scoffed from above us. "Yeah, the field. Listen to her. You two are a pair, you know that? The invalid and the failure. Maybe you should be the one changing his diapers, Kira. Since you don't have a real job, you've got plenty of time." I stiffened, ready to finally snap, ready to unleash a verbal airstrike that would leave Rick in ruins. But then, Arthur's grip tightened on my hand. For a man who struggled to hold a glass of water, his grip was surprisingly strong. It was the grip of a man who had held the line at Guadalcanal. He pulled me closer, forcing me to lean in until my ear was near his mouth. He smelled of Old Spice, peppermint candies, and old books. "Ignore him," Arthur wheezed, his voice barely audible over the sound of the football game returning to the TV. "He doesn't know." "Doesn't know what, Grandpa?" I whispered back. Arthur turned his head slightly. His eyes, usually clouded with age, were sharp, piercing through the facade I had built so carefully. He looked at me, really looked at me, not as his granddaughter, but as a soldier looking at an officer. "I saw inside your bag, Kira," he murmured. "When you came in, you left the zipper open." My breath hitched. My handbag contained my backup credentials and my dress uniform cap, which I had hastily shoved in there after changing in the car. "I saw the stars," Arthur said, a small, proud smile touching his trembling lips. 3 silver stars. And the nuclear football codes. "I know what that red phone is." I stared at him, stunned. I had spent years hiding my rank, my success, and my burden from this family to avoid their jealousy, to avoid exactly the kind of scene Rick was causing. But Arthur had seen. "You're a lieutenant general," he whispered, the words rolling off his tongue with reverence. "You're commanding the whole damn theater, aren't you?" "Grandpa, Shh." He silenced me with a squeeze of his hand. "You don't have to explain. I know why you keep quiet. The lion doesn't need to roar to prove it's a lion to a pack of hyenas." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. In this house, where I was treated like a parasite, like a child who failed to launch, the oldest, most broken man in the room was the only one who saw the truth. He didn't just see a granddaughter, he saw a commander. "You're carrying the weight of the world in that pocket, Madam General," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Don't let a man who peels potatoes for a living tell you how to hold a knife." A wave of warmth crashed over me, washing away the icy humiliation of the last hour. It was a transfer of strength. He was passing the torch of his generation's resilience to me. I wasn't alone at this table anymore. I had a flank man. "Thank you, Grandpa," I choked out. "Hey!" Rick banged on the table again, interrupting the moment. "Are you two done whispering secrets? God, it's like living in a nursing home. Arthur, stop bothering her and eat your stuffing before you spill that too. Rick laughed at his own joke, looking around for approval. He's lost his marbles, you know, Rick said to my aunt, gesturing loosely at Arthur. He thinks he's still in the Corps, probably telling her about how he single-handedly won the war. Pathetic. I stood up slowly, releasing Arthur's hand but keeping his strength with me. I turned to face Rick. I didn't look down. I didn't slouch. I stood at my full height, my shoulders squared, my chin up. The posture of a woman who walks the corridors of the Pentagon with authority. He has more dignity in his little finger than you have in your entire body, Rick, I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly so. Rick's smile faltered. He blinked, confused by the sudden change in my atmosphere. Excuse me? What did you just say to me? I said. The sound cut through the room like a siren. It wasn't the subtle vibration of a text message. It wasn't the standard marimba ringtone of an iPhone. It was a shrill, mechanical, old-school digital trill. The kind of ringtone that is hard-coded into secure government devices for one reason only. Immediate action required. It was coming from my pocket. The room went dead silent. The football announcers, the clinking of forks, the chewing, it all seemed to stop. Rick's eyes dropped to the pocket of my cardigan, where the red light was flashing through the knit fabric, pulsing in time with the screaming ringtone. I told you, Rick whispered, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. No. Electronics. He didn't know it yet, but the man calling on that phone had the power to turn this house into a parking lot. And I had to answer it. I have to take this, I said, my hand moving to my pocket. The hell you do, Rick spat, stepping around the spilled water, his eyes locking onto mine with the intent to harm. Give me that phone, Kira, now. The digital trill of the phone was relentless. Drrr ring, drrr ring, drrr ring. In a normal household, a ringing phone during Thanksgiving dinner is an annoyance. It's a telemarketer or a distant relative calling to wish everyone well. But this wasn't a normal ring. It was a frequency-hopping signal designed to cut through electronic jamming, broadcasting at a decibel level meant to wake a sleeping commander from a deep slumber in a bunk 5 decks down on an aircraft carrier. It was the sound of the world ending. I pulled the phone from my pocket. My hand didn't shake. Training took over. But my stomach dropped to the floor. The screen, usually dim and encrypted, was now blazing with a bright white background. In the center, the Great Seal of the United States, the eagle holding the olive branch and the arrows, rotated slowly. Below it, in bold black block letters, were 3 words that no civilian ever sees on a caller ID. Commander-in-Chief. My breath hitched. This was a flash override. It meant the president wasn't going through an aide. He wasn't going through the Secretary of Defense. He was bypassing the entire chain of command to speak directly to the senior watch officer. That meant the P-8 Poseidons I had deployed 10 minutes ago had found something. And whatever they found, it was bad enough to wake the president from his holiday dinner at Camp David. I have to take this, I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the dining room. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs screeching against the floor like a banshee. I stood up, clutching the device to my chest as if it were a grenade with the pin pulled. Sit down, Kira, Rick said. His voice was low, vibrating with a dangerous mix of alcohol and bruised ego. He didn't look at the phone. He looked at me, his eyes glazed and bloodshot. I can't, Rick, I said, taking a step toward the kitchen door. This is an emergency. An emergency? Rick laughed, a sharp, bitter bark. He slammed his beer can down on the table, crushing the aluminum. Foam spilled over his hand, but he didn't notice. What, did the data entry server go down? Did someone forget to file a TPS report? Rick, please, my mother whimpered from her seat. She was shrinking into herself, making herself as small as possible. Let her go outside. It's probably her boss. I am the boss in this house, Carol, Rick roared, standing up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward, crashing onto the floor. The violence of the movement made everyone jump. Even the football announcers on TV seemed to quiet down. Rick stood between me and the exit, a wall of angry, insecure flesh. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy crimson. The phone was still ringing. Drrr, ring. Drrr, ring. Every second that ticked by was a second the President of the United States was being kept waiting. In the military, making a superior officer wait is a sin. Making the President wait during a potential nuclear crisis is a court-martial offense. Rick, move, I said, my voice dropping to a command register. I wasn't the stepdaughter anymore. I was Lieutenant General Collins. You are obstructing an official federal communication. Rick blinked, momentarily stunned by the authority in my tone. Then his face twisted into a sneer. Federal communication, he mocked, stepping closer. He smelled of Miller Lite, turkey grease, and old sweat. Listen to you. You think because you watch NCIS you can talk to me like that? You think you're important. He jabbed a finger into my shoulder. It hurt, but I didn't flinch. You're a 38-year-old woman living in her childhood bedroom, Rick spat, saliva landing on my cheek. You don't have federal communications. You have delusions. Who is that? Is it a debt collector? Is it that boyfriend you made up? It's the president, I said. The truth slipped out before I could stop it. The room went dead silent. My aunt's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My mother looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, thinking I had finally snapped. Then Rick exploded with laughter. The president, he howled, slapping his thigh. He turned to the table. Did you hear that? She says it's the president. Oh, this is rich. Hey, Artie, your granddaughter is crazier than you are. She thinks Biden is calling her for turkey recipes. He turned back to me, his smile vanishing instantly, replaced by a cold, predatory glare. You think I'm stupid, don't you? Rick hissed. You think you can lie to my face in my own house? It's probably a telemarketer. Or worse, you're selling insurance now, aren't you? That's what this is, a sales call. It is a matter of national security, I said, enunciating every word. The phone in my hand vibrated violently, the urgency increasing. The protocol stated that if I didn't answer within 60 seconds, the Secret Service would initiate a remote wipe of the device and dispatch a containment team to my GPS location. We were at 45 seconds. National security, Rick repeated, shaking his head in mock disappointment. You are pathetic, Kira. You really are. You're so desperate to be special that you invent this fantasy world. Well, guess what? Reality check. He took another step toward me. He was inside my personal space now, looming over me. I'm going to teach you a lesson about respect, Rick said, extending his hand palm up. Give me the phone. I'm going to put it on speaker. I want everyone to hear this president of yours. I bet it's some guy named Steve from a call center in India trying to sell us an extended car warranty. Rick, do not touch this phone, I warned. My hand moved instinctively to my hip, muscle memory reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. If you interfere with this call, you are committing a felony. I am warning you. You're warning me. Rick's eyes bulged, the vein in his neck pulsed. You little ingrate, I put clothes on your back. I keep the heat on, and you threaten me? Carol, Rick shouted without looking away from me. Tell your daughter to hand over the phone before I throw her out on the street. Kira, just give it to him, my mother cried out, tears streaming down her face. Please, just let him see. Why do you have to be so difficult? Just apologize and give him the phone. Her betrayal hit me like a physical blow. She would rather see me humiliated. She would rather risk my career and unknowingly the safety of the country than see Rick upset. I can't do that, Mom, I whispered, my eyes locked on Rick. Time's up, Rick growled. He lunged. It wasn't a calculated military strike. It was a clumsy, drunken grab. But he was heavy, and we were in a confined space. He grabbed my wrist, the one holding the nuclear football link, with a crushing grip. His fingernails dug into my skin, drawing blood. Let go, I shouted, struggling to keep the device secure. Give it to me, Rick yelled, twisting my arm. I'm going to expose you for the liar you are. The phone was still ringing. Drrr ring. But now, as we wrestled over it, the countdown on the screen hit 0. The voicemail protocol didn't engage. Instead, the automated security bypass kicked in. The call connected automatically. Rick didn't know it. I didn't have time to tell him. He just saw the screen change, and in his drunken triumph, he ripped the phone from my hand, holding it up like a trophy. "Got it," he announced, panting heavily. He looked at the phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He saw the call-in-progress timer ticking up. "Now," Rick sneered, looking at the device with pure malice. "Let's see who this really is." He pressed the speakerphone button. The smell hit me before the pain did. It was a wave of stale Miller Lite, onion powder, and the sour metallic tang of aggressive male sweat. Rick didn't just reach for the phone, he crashed into me. It was a clumsy, heavy-handed tackle, the kind you see in a bar fight at 2 a.m., not in a dining room in suburban Virginia. His bulk pinned me against the edge of the kitchen counter, the granite digging sharply into my lower back. "I said give it here," he grunted, his breath hot and wet against my face. "Rick, stop! You are assaulting a federal officer," I shouted, instinctively twisting my body to shield the device. My training screamed at me to neutralize the threat. A simple throat strike or a joint lock would have dropped him in 2 seconds. But this was my mother's husband. This was Thanksgiving. And a small stupid part of me was still the daughter trying not to ruin the holiday. "Officer, you're a liar," Rick roared. His hand, thick and greasy from the turkey skin, clamped down on my wrist. He squeezed, hard. I felt the tendons in my forearm strain. His fingernails, ragged and dirty, dug into my skin, scraping down toward my hand. It burned, a sharp stinging heat that made me gasp. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the sound that cut through the struggle. "Kira, stop it! Just give it to him!" It was my mother. She wasn't screaming at the man who was physically attacking her daughter. She wasn't dialing 911. She was standing by the table, wringing her hands, her face twisted in annoyance at me. "Why do you always have to be so difficult?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He just wants to see the phone. Why do you have to ruin everything? Just give it to your father and apologize." Your father. That word severed the last tether holding me to this family. In that split second, amidst the grunt of exertion and the smell of cheap beer, my heart didn't break. It turned to stone. She saw me being hurt, she saw me being humiliated, and her only instinct was to offer me up as a sacrifice to keep the beast calm. My grip on the phone faltered, not because Rick was stronger, but because the will to fight for them had evaporated. Rick sensed the weakness. He wrenched my wrist back with a sickening pop of cartilage. My fingers spasmed involuntarily, and the black rubberized brick of the secure smartphone slipped from my grasp. "Ha!" Rick shouted, stumbling back with his prize. Everything seemed to downshift into slow motion. I saw the phone leave my hand. I saw the screen, still glowing with the intense white light of the flash override protocol. The timer on the call was ticking upward. 0003, 000004. Rick held the phone up high, like a hunter hoisting a severed deer head. He was panting, his chest heaving under his tight polo shirt, a triumphant, ugly grin stretching across his face. "Gotcha!" he wheezed, wiping a smear of saliva from his lip. "Now let's see what little secrets you're hiding." I stood up straight. I smoothed the front of my cardigan. I didn't lunge for him again. I didn't scream. I pulled a calmness around me like a suit of armor. It was the icy, detached focus I used when authorized a drone strike. I looked at Rick. I didn't see a stepfather anymore. I saw a hostile combatant who had just breached the perimeter of a Tier 1 national security asset. "Rick," I said, my voice terrifyingly quiet, "you have exactly 3 seconds to put that phone down and step away. If you speak into that device, your life as you know it is over." Rick laughed. It was a wet, hacking sound. "Oh, save the drama for your blog, Kira. My life is over? Please, I pay the mortgage here. I own you." He looked at the screen, squinting to read the bold text. "Commander-in-Chief," he read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Wow. You really committed to the bit, didn't you? You even changed the contact name. That is pathetic. Truly pathetic." He looked around the room, seeking his audience. My mother was sobbing into her napkin. My aunt looked horrified. Grandpa Arthur was staring at Rick with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Watch this," Rick announced to the room. "I'm going to put the president on speaker. Let's see if he sounds like that guy from the T-Mobile store. He raised a thick, calloused finger and hovered it over the speaker icon. I took a step back, not out of fear, but to clear the blast radius. I knew what was coming. The moment he engaged with that line, the passive listening protocols at the White House Communications Agency would flag his voice print as unauthorized. The Secret Service detail monitoring the line would be listening. He was about to poke a stick into the eye of the most powerful military apparatus on Earth. This is the moment. The moment a bully crosses a line he can never uncross. If you are waiting for Rick to get exactly what he deserves, hit that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, do it. Type, do it if you want Kira to let him dig his own grave. Rick pressed the button. Beep. The audio switched from the handset to the speaker. The room fell into a silence so deep it felt like the air had been sucked out of the house. Even the TV seemed to mute itself. The only sound was the heavy, raspy breathing of Rick, magnified by the silence of the open line. Rick brought the phone closer to his face, smirking. "Hello?" he bellowed, his voice booming and arrogant. "Who is this? Listen here, buddy. You've got a lot of nerve calling my house during Thanksgiving dinner." Silence from the other end. "I asked you a question," Rick shouted, emboldened by the lack of response. "Who the hell is this? Do you know what time it is? You're interrupting a man's meal. Speak up, or I'm going to report this number for harassment." He looked at me and winked. A disgusting, conspiratorial wink that said, "See? I told you it was fake. I told you nobody important calls you." "Kira here thinks she's some big shot," Rick continued into the phone, laughing. "But we both know she's just a... This is the President of the United States." The voice cut through Rick's laughter like a diamond cutter through cheap glass. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting. It was calm. It was deep. It was the unmistakable resonant baritone that every American had heard on the evening news, in State of the Union addresses, and in times of crisis. It carried the weight of the Oval Office, the authority of the Constitution, and the absolute power of the entire U.S. Armed Forces. Rick froze. His mouth, open to deliver another insult, hung slack. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug in his heels. The red flush of alcohol vanished, replaced by a sickly, pasty gray. What?" Rick stammered, his voice suddenly tiny. "I asked," the voice on the phone repeated, icy and sharp as a razor, "who I am speaking with. You are holding a secure nuclear command device assigned to Lieutenant General Kira Collins. Identify yourself immediately." Rick looked at the phone. Then he looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a primal, animalistic terror. The arrogance was gone. The bully was gone. All that was left was a man realizing he was standing on the tracks, and the train was already here. The silence that followed Rick's arrogant demand wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was a physical weight that pressed down on the dining room table, suffocating the laughter, the chewing, and the hum of the refrigerator. For 2 agonizing seconds, the only sound on the speakerphone was a faint, rhythmic static. The sound of an encrypted satellite connection spanning thousands of miles. Rick stood there, his chest puffed out, his face a mask of drunken bravado. He looked around at the guests, his eyebrows raised as if to say, "See? I called their bluff." He was expecting a dial tone. He was expecting a stammering telemarketer. He was expecting the silence of a prank caller hanging up. Instead, a voice filled the room. It was a voice that every person at that table had heard 1,000 times. We had heard it in our living rooms during the State of the Union. We had heard it on car radios during morning commutes. It was a voice that commanded podiums, signed treaties, and launched armies. It was calm, resonant, and unmistakably, terrifyingly familiar. "This is the President of the United States." The words didn't just hang in the air, they landed like anvil strikes. Thud, thud, thud. Rick's smirk didn't fade, it shattered. It was as if someone had physically slapped the expression off his face. His mouth, which had been open to deliver another insult, snapped shut, then popped open again, working silently, like a fish on a dock. I am speaking with the individual who has just intercepted a Priority 1 communication on a secure line, the president continued. The tone was not angry. It was worse. It was the cold, detached bureaucratic steel of absolute authority. Identify yourself. Rick blinked rapidly. His brain, soaked in cheap beer and decades of unearned confidence, was misfiring. He looked at the phone in his hand as if it had suddenly turned into a live cobra. Rick stammered. The booming baritone that usually dominated the household was gone, replaced by a high-pitched squeak. Who is this really? Is this a radio station? Is this a prank show? He looked at me, desperation clawing at his eyes. Kira, is this your friends playing a joke? Tell them to stop. It's not funny. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. I watched the blood drain from his face, turning his complexion from a flushed, angry red to the color of wet newspaper. I watched the sweat break out on his upper lip, tiny beads of terror pooling instantly. This is not a joke, sir. The president's voice cut in, sharper this time. And I do not have time for games. You are currently holding a device classified top secret under the Atomic Energy Act of 1954. I will ask you one last time. Who are you? Rick's hand began to shake. It started as a subtle vibration and quickly escalated until the phone was wobbling visibly in his grip. I'm Rick, he whispered. Then, realizing how pathetic that sounded, he tried to muster some of his old bluster, but it crumbled before it left his throat. I'm the homeowner, Rick Davis. This is my house. Mr. Davis, the president said. He pronounced the name with a distaste that suggested Rick was something he had stepped in. Why are you in possession of Lieutenant General Collins's secure comms unit? The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of the air. Lieutenant General Collins. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes darted to me, wide and uncomprehending. She looked at her failure of a daughter, the one she apologized for, the one she pitied, and tried to reconcile that image with the title the leader of the free world had just used. General. Not Kira. Not her. General. Rick looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. The cognitive dissonance was tearing him apart. General? Rick choked out, a nervous, hysterical laugh bubbling up. No, Mr. President. Sir, you've got the wrong person. This is Kira, my stepdaughter. She's unemployed. She plays video games. She's just... Kira. Mr. Davis, the president interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. You are mistaken. The officer standing in your kitchen is the Deputy Director of Strategic Operations for the Pacific Theater. She is currently coordinating a response to a hostile foreign incursion. And you... The pause was excruciating. You have just severed her connection to the Pentagon during a crisis. Do you have any idea what you have done? Rick's knees actually buckled. He had to grab the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. The sweat was now streaming down his face, dripping off his chin onto his polo shirt. I didn't know, Rick whimpered. He sounded like a child caught stealing candy, not a grown man. She didn't tell me. She just said it was work. I thought she was lying. I thought... Ignorance is not a defense for treason, Mr. Davis, the president stated. The word hung in the air. Treason. Treason, Rick stuttered, his face turning a shade of gray I didn't know human skin could achieve. No, wait. I'm a patriot. I served. I was in the mess hall at Fort Bragg. I love this country. Then you should have respected its uniform, the president retorted. Under the Espionage Act, interfering with a nuclear command and control asset carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Impeding a high-ranking officer during a state of emergency, that can be considered an act of domestic terrorism. Oh my God, my mother wailed softly, burying her face in her hands. Rick looked at me, his eyes pleading, wet with tears of terror. Kira, tell him I didn't mean it. Tell him we were just... Just joking around. We're family, right? Family jokes. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me useless 5 minutes ago. I looked at the man who had made my mother cry for years. I looked at the man who had just risked millions of lives because his ego couldn't handle a woman having a secret. I didn't say a word. I just raised an eyebrow. "The time for talking is over, Mr. Davis," the president said. "We tracked the GPS signal of the device the moment unauthorized contact was made. You have wasted enough of my time, and you have endangered enough American lives for one night." Rick was shaking so hard now that the phone slipped in his sweaty palm. He clutched it with both hands, terrifyingly afraid to drop it, yet terrified to keep holding it. "Please," Rick begged, addressing the speakerphone. "I'm sorry. I'll give it back. I'll give it back right now. Just don't arrest me, please." "It is too late for that," the president said. The voice was final, absolute. "Mr. Davis, do me a favor." "Anything," Rick cried. "Anything, sir." "Look out your window." Rick froze. He slowly, agonizingly turned his head toward the large bay window that overlooked the front driveway. The driveway he was so proud of. The driveway where he parked his leased pickup truck. He took a step toward the glass, his movements jerky and robotic. I don't see," Rick started to say. Then, the world outside exploded into light. Rick never saw the driveway. He never saw his prized Ford F-150. He never saw the manicured lawn he spent every Saturday obsessing over. What he saw was a wall of blinding, impossible white light. It hit the bay window with the force of a physical blow, turning the night instantly into a hyper-exposed, washing-out glare. Simultaneously, the air above the house began to vibrate. It wasn't just a sound, it was a rhythmic, chest-compressing thumping that rattled the fine china in the hutch. Thwup, 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 thwup. Black Hawk helicopters, low altitude, hovering directly over the roof. "What the?" Rick started, shielding his eyes with the hand not holding the phone. He didn't get to finish the sentence. Crash! The bay window didn't just break, it disintegrated. Controlled detonation charges blew the glass inward in a shower of glittering shards. Before the first piece of glass hit the floor, 3 canisters clattered across the hardwood. Bang! 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 Flashbangs. A searing white light and a concussive boom rocked the dining room. My mother screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pure terror. My aunt dove under the table. Even the heavy oak table seemed to jump. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. My training kicked in instantly. I knew exactly what was happening. I tucked my chin, opened my mouth slightly to equalize the pressure, and stood perfectly still. This was a breach and clear. Textbook execution. Through the smoke and the ringing in everyone's ears, the lasers appeared. Dozens of them. Tiny dancing red dots swarmed over Rick's chest, his face, and his trembling hands. He looked like a Christmas tree lit up in hell. "Federal agents, get down now." The command didn't come from one person, it came from everywhere. The back door was kicked in. The front door was rammed open. The shattered window became a portal for shadows to pour through. Men in full tactical gear, black Kevlar vests, ballistic helmets, assault rifles raised, swarmed the room. They moved with the terrifying, fluid speed of a pack of wolves. These weren't local cops. This was the Secret Service counter-assault team, CAT, the tip of the spear, the guys who eat bullets for the president. Rick stood there, frozen, his brain unable to process the shift from Thanksgiving dinner to war zone. He was still holding the phone up, blinking stupidly at the laser sights painting his forehead. "Drop the device! Drop it!" Rick tried to speak. I live... He was too slow. 2 agents hit him like a freight train. There was no negotiation. There was no, please. One agent swept Rick's legs while the other drove a shoulder into his midsection. Rick went down hard, but he didn't hit the floor. Gravity and momentum conspired to deliver the most poetic justice I had ever witnessed. Rick's face, open-mouthed, terrified, slammed directly into the large ceramic bowl of mashed potatoes on the center of the table. Splat. The bowl shattered. Creamy, buttery potatoes exploded outward like a starch grenade, covering the turkey, the green beans, and coating Rick's head in a thick, white layer of humiliation. Before he could even sputter, the agents dragged him off the table and slammed him onto the hardwood floor. Hands! Give me your hands! Rick was thrashing, making muffled noises through the potatoes clogging his nose and mouth. Mmph. Gah! My back! You're breaking my arm. Stop resisting. Zip. The sound of heavy-duty plastic zip ties cinching tight was music to my ears. Rick's hands were wrenched behind his back, securing him in a position of total submission. An agent pressed a knee into the small of Rick's back, pinning him to the ground like an insect. Subject secure, the agent yelled. Device is loose. I repeat, the football is loose. The phone had skittered across the floor during the takedown, landing near the buffet table. The chaos in the room was absolute. My mother was huddled in the corner, sobbing hysterically, clutching her pearls. My aunt was praying loudly. The neighbors who had been laughing at me 5 minutes ago were lying face down on the carpet, hands over their heads, trembling. Only 2 people were calm. Me and Grandpa Arthur. Arthur sat in his wheelchair, a napkin tucked into his collar, watching the scene with a serene, almost gleeful expression. He caught my eye and gave me a barely perceptible nod. Semper Fi, General. The front door opened again. The heavy tactical boots of the entry team made way for polished dress shoes. A tall man in a sharp black suit walked in. He wore an earpiece and the grim expression of a man who had not smiled since the Reagan administration. It was Special Agent Miller, the detail leader. I'd worked with him during the G20 summit. He walked past my sobbing mother. He walked past Rick, who was currently trying to spit mashed potatoes out of his mouth while groaning about a lawsuit. He walked past the armed agents. Miller stopped at the buffet table. He produced a microfiber cloth from his pocket, picked up the secure smartphone with the reverence one would show a religious artifact, and quickly inspected it for damage. Satisfied, he turned to me. The room fell silent again, save for Rick's pathetic whimpering. Agent Miller walked up to me, stopped exactly 3 feet away, and snapped his heels together. He didn't look at me like a suburban stepdaughter. He looked at me like I was the only person in the room who mattered. He extended the phone with both hands. General Collins, Miller said, his voice cutting through the noise. The asset is secured. The line is still open. The president is holding for your situation report. I took the phone. I wiped a small speck of potato off the screen with my thumb. Thank you, Agent Miller, I said, my voice steady. What is the status of the perimeter? Perimeter is locked down, ma'am, Miller replied sharply. Airspace is cleared. We have a containment team scrubbing the digital footprint of everyone in this house. No one leaves until you say so. I nodded. Then, I looked down. Rick had managed to lift his head off the floor. His face was a mask of white potato paste, gravy, and blood from a split lip. One eye was swollen shut. He looked up at me, and for the first time, he really saw me. He heard the agent call me General. He saw the respect. He saw the guns. And his brain finally caught up. General, Rick rasped, spitting out a lump of potato. Kira, what is happening? My mother pulled herself up from the corner, her makeup running down her face. Kira, why are they calling you that? Tell them to stop. Tell them to let Rick go. I ignored her. I stepped closer to Rick, the heels of my boots clicking ominously on the hardwood floor, stopping inches from his nose. You wanted to know what I do, Rick, I said, looking down at him. You wanted to know why I sit in my room. You wanted to know if I was selling insurance. I leaned down, just enough so he could see the cold, hard truth in my eyes. I hunt submarines, I whispered, and I neutralize threats. Today, the threat was you. Rick's eyes widened in horror. He started to cry, not the angry tears of a drunk, but the terrified, broken sobs of a man who realizes he has spent years kicking a sleeping dragon. Kira, please, Rick blubbered, snot and gravy mixing on his chin. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. We're family. Tell them, I'm your dad. I'm your dad. Agent Miller, I said, standing back up and turning away from the pathetic mess on the floor. Yes, General? Get this trash out of my sight. The screaming didn't stop when the front door closed. It just became muffled, a pathetic rhythmic wailing that faded as Agent Miller's team dragged Rick toward the waiting convoy of black SUVs. Don't tase me. I have high blood pressure. I know people. Then, the heavy oak doors slammed shut, sealing the noise outside. Inside, the silence that followed was louder than the flashbangs. The dining room was a war zone. The bay window was a jagged maw of broken glass, letting the chilly November wind swirl into the room, carrying the scent of dead leaves and cordite. The festive Thanksgiving table was overturned, the turkey rolling on the floor amidst a sea of white mashed potatoes and broken china. I stood in the center of the wreckage, the secure phone gripped tightly in my hand. My heart rate was slowing down, returning to its resting rhythm. I was in control. The threat was neutralized, the asset was secure. But the real ambush was just beginning. Kira! It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I turned just in time to see my mother, Carol, rushing toward me. Her hair was disheveled, her mascara running in dark, ugly streaks down her cheeks. For a fleeting, foolish second, a childlike part of my brain thought she was coming to hug me. I thought she was coming to check if I was hurt, if Rick's clawing nails had broken the skin on my wrist. I braced myself for an embrace. Instead, she grabbed the lapels of my cardigan and shook me. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "What have you done to us?" I stared at her, my arms hanging limp at my sides. "I secured a breach, Mother. Rick interfered with—" "I don't care about your stupid work," she screamed, cutting me off. She pounded her small fists against my chest. It didn't hurt physically, but every blow felt like it was fracturing a rib. "You ruined everything. You ruined Thanksgiving. They took him. Did you see that? They put him in cuffs like a common criminal." "He committed a felony, Mom," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the warmth I used to reserve for her. "He assaulted a federal officer. He endangered national security. I didn't arrest him. He arrested himself the moment he touched this phone." "You could have stopped them," Carol wailed, letting go of me to gesture wildly at the agents standing guard by the door. "You're a general, aren't you? That's what they said. You're a general. Order them to let him go. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them he was just joking." "I can't do that," I replied. "You won't do that," she corrected, her face twisting into a mask of ugliness I had never seen before. "You're doing this on purpose. You've always hated him. You've always been jealous of our happiness. You did this to humiliate him." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked for the mother who used to read me bedtime stories, the woman who used to protect me from the monsters under the bed. But that woman was gone. In her place stood an enabler, a woman so terrified of being alone that she would side with the monster rather than the child she was supposed to protect. "Happiness?" I asked, a cold laugh escaping my lips. "Mom, he treats you like a servant. He spent your retirement fund. He bullies you. Is that happiness?" "He loves me," she sobbed. "And now look." She pointed at the shattered window. Outside, the red and blue lights of the police cruisers were flashing against the trees. Neighbors were gathering on their lawns, phones out, filming the spectacle. "The neighbors!" Carol gasped, clutching her pearls. "The Johnsons are watching. The Millers are out there. Oh God, the Homeowners Association. Kira, do you know what they're going to say? We'll be pariahs. How can I show my face at the book club?" Something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet final sound of a tether being cut. For years, I had paid the mortgage on this house to keep her safe. I had swallowed Rick's insults to keep her calm. I had diminished myself, hidden my rank, and played the role of the spinster failure just so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. And in the end, her biggest concern wasn't that her husband had almost triggered a nuclear incident. It was what the neighbors would think. I reached up and gently, but firmly, removed her hands from my jacket. "I don't care about the neighbors, Mom," I said. My voice was ice. "And frankly, you shouldn't worry about the book club. You should worry about the mortgage." Carol froze. Her weeping stopped instantly. "What?" "I'm done," I said. "I'm done being the punching bag. I'm done being the bank. The automatic transfers stopped today. The mortgage payments stop today. If you want to keep this house, you and Rick can figure it out. Maybe he can pay for it with the money he makes making license plates in federal prison. You can't do that, she whispered, stepping back, looking at me with horror. I'm your mother. You owe me. I owe you respect, I said. And I have given you that for 38 years by not telling you how weak you are. But I don't owe you my life, and I certainly don't owe you my dignity. Kira, please, she begged, switching tactics instantly from aggression to pity. I can't do this alone. Don't leave me here. You're not alone, Mom, I said, gesturing to the empty, broken room. You have exactly what you chose. You chose him over me every single time. I turned my back on her. It was the hardest thing I had ever done physically. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to fix it, to apologize, to make peace. But I knew that peace in this house was just a lie painted over a war zone. I walked toward the door. Kira, she screamed one last time. If you walk out that door, don't you dare come back. You hear me? You're dead to me. I didn't stop. But before I reached the exit, I paused. To my right, sitting amidst the carnage of the overturned table and the potato-covered floor, was Grandpa Arthur. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He sat in his wheelchair, his hands resting on the armrests. The chaos hadn't touched him. In fact, he looked more lucid, more present than he had in years. I walked over to him. The Secret Service agents parted to let me through. Grandpa, I said softly. Arthur looked up. His blue eyes were clear. The tremors in his hands seemed to have steadied. He looked at the wreckage of the room, then at his sobbing daughter, and finally at me. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He knew the cost of command. He knew that sometimes to save the ship, you have to cut the anchor. Slowly, with a great and trembling effort, Arthur lifted his right hand. He straightened his spine as much as his age would allow, and he saluted. It wasn't a perfect salute. His hand shook, and his angle was a bit off. But it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was a salute from one soldier to another. A recognition of rank, yes, but more importantly, a recognition of courage. Semper Fi, kid, his eyes said. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I snapped my heels together, stood at attention, and rendered a crisp, slow hand salute in return. Goodbye, Grandpa, I whispered. I'll come back for you, I promise. I'll get you out of here. He nodded once, a small smile playing on his lips. I turned and walked toward the gaping hole where the front door used to be. The wind hit me full in the face, cold, biting, and incredibly clean. Agent Miller was waiting for me. He held the door open, his face impassive. Your vehicle is ready, General, he said. I stepped out onto the porch. The front lawn was a circus of flashing lights and curious onlookers. But parked right at the curb, cutting through the chaos like a shark through water, was a massive black Chevrolet Suburban with diplomatic plates. I walked past the neighbors who had whispered about poor, single Kira for years. I walked past the spot where Rick's truck used to be. I climbed into the back seat of the armored vehicle. The leather was cool and smelled of new car and safety. Agent Miller slammed the heavy door shut. Thud. The sound was final. It was the sound of a vault locking, the sound of a chapter ending. Through the tinted bulletproof glass, I looked back at the house one last time. I saw my mother standing in the doorway, a silhouette of misery. Drive, I said. I didn't look back. 6 months later. The notification on my personal cell phone was distinct. It wasn't the red ring of the nuclear football anymore. That device was safely secured in a biometric safe at my office. This was just a standard civilian vibration. I looked down at the screen. It was a voicemail transcript from a blocked number. Kira, please. It's Mom. Listen, he's having a hard time in Cumberland. The Federal Correctional Institution isn't like the movies, honey. It's cold. He needs money for his commissary account. He says the food is inedible. He needs hygiene products. Please, just call me back. The neighbors are still talking, and I'm all alone here. We're family. I didn't finish reading the transcript. I didn't feel a spike of anger. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I felt absolutely nothing. It was like reading a weather report for a city I no longer lived in. Rick was currently serving year 1 of a 20-year sentence for interfering with a federal officer and obstructing national security operations. My mother was living in the house I had stopped paying for, likely drowning in the reality she had helped create. I pressed delete. Then I went into my settings and permanently blocked the number. General Collins, the president is ready for you. I looked up. The young aide standing in the doorway of the West Wing waiting room looked nervous. I smiled at him, a genuine, warm smile. Thank you, I said, standing up. I wasn't wearing an oversized cardigan today. I wasn't hunching my shoulders to make myself look smaller. I was wearing my Army service uniform, the dress blues. The fabric was tailored to perfection, hugging my shoulders. On my epaulets, 3 silver stars caught the light of the chandelier. I walked past the aide, my stride long and purposeful. The sound of my heels on the hardwood floor was rhythmic, authoritative. Click, clack, click, clack. We walked through the narrow corridors of the West Wing, past the portraits of Lincoln and Washington, until we reached the heavy double doors of the Oval Office. The doors opened. The afternoon sun was streaming through the bulletproof glass behind the resolute desk, bathing the room in a golden glow. Standing there, waiting for me, was the commander-in-chief. He looked up from a briefing paper and smiled. It was the same man whose voice had turned Rick's blood to ice, but today his expression was one of warmth and respect. General, he said, stepping around the desk with his hand extended. It is good to see you under quieter circumstances. Mr. President, I replied, shaking his hand firmly. He gestured to the center of the room, where a small group of photographers and the Secretary of Defense were waiting. I wanted to do this privately, as you requested. No press, just the record. I appreciate that, sir, I said. I've had enough drama to last a lifetime. The president chuckled. He picked up a velvet box from the side table. For your actions on Thanksgiving Day, not only did you successfully coordinate the interception of a hostile Yasin-class submarine without a single shot fired, but you maintained the integrity of the nuclear command chain while under, let's call it, extreme domestic duress. He opened the box. Inside lay the Distinguished Service Medal. Your grandfather, the president asked softly as he pinned the medal to my uniform, right above my heart. How is he? He's thriving, sir, I said, a lump forming in my throat. I moved him into the Armed Forces Retirement Home in D.C. last month. He spends his days swapping war stories with other Marines. He finally has an audience that listens. Good, the president nodded, stepping back and saluting me. I returned the salute. It was crisp. It was sharp. It was the motion of a woman who knew exactly who she was. As I walked out of the White House 20 minutes later, the autumn air hit my face. It was crisp and clean, much like the air on that night I left Virginia, but without the scent of burning bridges. I climbed into the back of my government vehicle. The Pentagon, please. As the car wove through the D.C. traffic, I looked out the window at the Potomac River. I thought about the woman I used to be, the 38-year-old girl who hid in her room, the daughter who apologized for her own existence, the woman who let a bully dictate her worth because she was afraid of shattering the fragile peace of a broken home. I realized then that the silence I had kept for so many years wasn't a weakness, as Rick had claimed. It wasn't submission, it was incubation. I pulled out my phone, not the red one, my personal one, and opened the camera app. I looked at my reflection in the screen. The woman staring back had steel in her eyes. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." For years, I'd given them my consent. I'd handed Rick the power to hurt me every time I sat at his table and let him speak. I'd handed my mother the power to break my heart every time I paid her bills in secret. But I had revoked that consent. And in doing so, I hadn't just saved a command link, I had saved myself. The car pulled up to the river entrance of the Pentagon. I stepped out, adjusting my cap. The massive concrete building, the nerve center of the American military, loomed above me. To some, it was intimidating. To me, it was home. I walked through the security checkpoints, the guards snapping to attention as I passed. I walked down the long, polished corridors of the E-ring. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound echoed off the marble walls. It wasn't just the sound of footsteps. It was the sound of a beast that had been caged for too long, finally roaming its territory. I stopped in front of a window overlooking the courtyard. I looked at my reflection in the glass one last time. Silence isn't empty, I whispered to the empty hallway, and perhaps to you, listening right now. Silence is where you reload. I turned away from the window and walked toward the war room. The doors opened automatically for me. The staff inside stood up as I entered. "General on deck," someone shouted. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down. I walked straight to the head of the table. The general's shadow was gone. The general had arrived. My war is finally over, but I know for many of you, the battle for respect is still being fought in your own dining rooms. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own sanity, or if you're still searching for the courage to set that boundary, I want to hear your story in the comments below. You are not alone. If my victory gave you a spark of strength today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where silence is no longer a weakness, but a weapon. Until next time.